Welcome. You've joined us for a unique deep dive today. We're setting aside the usual headlines to explore something deeply personal and profoundly spiritual.
Yes, we're looking at Volume 1 of The Divine Will by Servant of God Luisa Piccarreta.
Exactly. And for you, as part of our Catholic audience interested in this spiritual work, think of this as an opportunity to gain some really profound insights quickly and thoroughly, almost like a guided exploration.
That's a good way to put it. It's not formal theology, not in the usual sense.
Right.
Instead, Volume 1 gives us this direct window into Louisa's intimate spiritual journey, her personal dialogues with Jesus. So it's inherently devotional, very personal.
And this volume really sets the stage, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It establishes the bedrock, introduces the fundamental themes, the extraordinary nature of her relationship with God right from the start.
Okay. So our mission, if you will, in this deep dive is to pull out those key insights, the recurring themes from just this first volume.
Trying to give a clear, engaging overview without getting too bogged down in every single detail.
Exactly. Hitting those aha moments. Consider it a shortcut to grasping the heart of this volume. And, if this resonates, if there's interest, we can definitely look at later volumes.
For sure. Future deep dives.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Where do we begin?
Well, a natural starting point is how Louisa actually experiences this communication with God, with Jesus.
Right, from page 1, basically?
Right from the beginning, yeah.
Yep.
You see her relying completely on Jesus for strength, for guidance. She feels weak. She's afraid of disobeying these spiritual directions she's getting.
That feeling of inadequacy, it's so human, isn't it? When you feel called to something spiritual.
Absolutely. And she has this intense desire for what she calls divine light, to get rid of the darkness inside her. That image she uses of Jesus as the mystical son is quite powerful.
And then there's the interior voice.
Yes, and this voice, it's constant. She says it gave her no respite and no peace until she obeyed.
Wow, no peace.
None. Until she did what it asked. You can picture it, like a loving but very firm father guiding a child. Reprimands, corrections, encouragement.
In every little thing.
Pretty much. It was pervasive. This voice was deeply involved in the tiny details of her life.
Like even during communion. I think I read that on page 3.
Exactly. Very personal, intimate conversations right there. Promises of devotion exchanged, Jesus assuring her he's always watching, always present. It's an astonishing level of guidance.
Moment to moment, really.
Yes, and it extends to things that might seem small to us. Like the voice corrects her for excessive conversations or thinking too much about her family.
Really? Why?
The focus had to be entirely on God's glory, the salvation of souls, kind of mirroring the Holy Family's focus in Nazareth, a constant call to center everything on God.
Which kind of leads us naturally into the next big theme, right? Learning to love and detach.
Precisely. There's this pivotal moment after communion one morning, page 4, where Jesus gives her this profound understanding. His immense love versus the inconstancy of creatures, as she puts it.
So not stop loving people, but differently.
Exactly. Learning to love them in God, seeing them as images of God, recognizing any good received through them comes ultimately from Him, the prime author.
So that fosters a deeper connection directly with God.
Right. It prevents the heart from getting too attached to the created rather than the creator.
And that changes how you see hardships too, doesn't it? Mortification.
Completely. They're not just random suffering. They become instruments God uses for her sanctification.
So less resentment towards people who cause pain.
Much less. Because she learns to see even those events within God's plan, viewing all creatures in God, maintaining esteem despite their flaws, looking deeper.
Okay. Then there's the path of humility. Self-annihilation. That sounds intense.
It is. Page 5, Jesus declares these great designs he has for her, to make her a perfect image of himself from birth to death, taught directly by him.
That's quite a statement.
It is. And the very first step he emphasizes is self-annihilation, humility, emptying herself to make room for God's grace.
Like the baby in swaddling clothes analogy. Totally dependent.
Exactly that. Utter dependence. It's a stark contrast to how we often think, isn't it? Wanting to be self-reliant.
Yeah. And he warns against taking credit for things.
He does. God is wary, the text says, of souls who attribute things to themselves. But he's generous to those who know they are nothing without him, totally dependent.
It all comes back to the source.
It does. And sin, in this light, isn't just rule-breaking. It's a personal affront to Jesus, horrendous ingratitude, enormous wickedness, very personal language.
But then, interestingly, He tells her not to dwell on past sins after confession, around page 7.
Yes. If she's sincerely repentant, dwelling on it actually hinders closeness to his love, stops spiritual growth.
Because his forgiveness is total. He forgets it.
That's how it's presented, complete forgiveness.
Yeah.
Clinging to guilt after that is almost like, well, it keeps you away from the healing he offers.
Yeah.
A vital point, really.
Okay. Moving on, then, to the mortification of the will. Another big one.
Huge. Also page 7. Jesus demands her will be sacrificed, like a victim, before him.
So her will and his become one.
That's the goal. An extraordinary surrender. And it's not passive. Jesus actively contradicts her will. In everything. Sometimes using other people to do it.
Contradicts her how?
Well, pages 8 and 9 give tiny examples. Correcting her for delaying getting up, letting her eyes wander, enjoying creation too much, even finding pleasure in holy things if the focus isn't purely God.
Wow, that's meticulous scrutiny.
It is. The point is to make her own will die completely, so it can live only for him, detaching from even innocent inclinations if they aren't, his specific desire right then.
And this even applies to her confessor, the communion example.
Yes, pages 9 and 10. The pain she feels when her desire for communion is denied by her confessor. It's palpable. But obeying, even then, brings this inner comfort from Jesus.
That shows the challenge of obedience in spiritual direction, doesn't it?
Powerfully. Even when it feels wrong or goes against deep desires, obedience can lead to a deeper union.
Then, around page 11, things shift. Jesus says the past was preparation.
Preparation for the facts, he calls it.
Returns.
The active imitation of his life by entering the immense sea of my passion.
So meditating on the passion becomes central now.
Absolutely. But not just feeling sad. It's about understanding the bitterness of his pain, the love he suffered with, his divinity and her own. Wretchedness is the word used.
To help her accept her own suffering.
Exactly. And the passion is described as this immense sea of light.
Page 12.
Yes. With rays of virtues that kind of reproach her, showing her how different she is from Christ, illuminating her imperfections.
There's that vision of Jesus carrying the cross too, pages 13, 14.
Very vivid. And it sparks this intense sorrow in her, this yearning to help him, to embrace her own cross more willingly. The desire for suffering, to unite with him, really grows here.
And Jesus responds to that desire. The thorns, the squeezing heart.
Quite directly, yes. Almost physically manifested. But always driven by her desire, her pleading for this participation.
And Jesus' resemblance comes through suffering, page 15.
Explicitly, that's the path, which leads to a really tough period. He withdraws his sensible presence.
That feeling of closeness vanishes. That must have been terrifying.
It was. She pleads for him to stay. But he explains it's necessary.
Why?
To help her truly grasp her own nothingness without him, deepen her humility, and prepare her for even greater graces later. A trial by absence.
Which leads to spiritual desolation. Testing, page 17.
Exactly. Bitter desolation. Feeling breathless, ice cold, realizing any past good was purely God's grace. Without him, she feels only limitation, inclination to evil.
But she keeps going with her prayers.
She does. Out of fear, partly. Fear of his chastisement if she's unfaithful. It shows a commitment beyond just feelings.
And when his presence returns.
It confirms for her that these experiences, both the closeness and the absence, were real, not just her imagination.
Page 19 mentions the specific struggles during those dry times.
Yeah, distractions in prayer, can't stay recollected, feels empty, afraid of punishment. Very relatable struggles, actually.
And Jesus gives advice for navigating that dryness. Page 20.
Valuable advice for anyone, really. Humility, resignation to God's will, offering the bitterness as a sacrifice, the promise of gain through apparent loss.
And he reveals the deepest pain for souls close to him.
Is the deprivation of himself. Page 21. That relationship is everything.
Which leads to the 33 daily visits to the Blessed Sacrament instruction.
Yes, aligning with his earthly years. Constant reparation and adoration throughout the day.
Okay, after desolation comes spiritual warfare.
Temptation.
A stark shift, yes.
Yeah.
Page 22, Jesus asks about her love, her readiness for his will, preparing her for new, heavy crosses.
He intentionally puts her in the midst of demons to test her.
That's what he says, to purify her, test her faithfulness. He uses that analogy of a victorious king returning from battle. The soul is enriched through the fight and promises his dwelling within her afterwards.
Yes. But the descriptions of the attacks themselves, starting page 26, they're harrowing. Hatred for God, despair, suicidal thoughts, physical torments during prayer, feeling pulled into hell.
Truly terrifying.
But he reassures her, page 25, the temptations won't exceed the grace he gives. And he points out why some souls fall.
Lack of prayer, disobedience.
Exactly. So prayer, blind obedience to the confessor, and courage are the essential defenses. Demons fear courageous souls united to God.
And Jesus steps in during the worst attacks.
He does. Page 28. Consoles her, calls the devil a liar, promises eventual peace.
And gives tactics to fight back. Page 29.
Simple, but powerful. Despise them. Ignore their noise. Respond with prayer and reparation.
This intense warfare seems like a preparation for victimhood,
Well,
deeper union. Page 30.
it really paves the way. She sees a vision, Jesus suffering. Then Mary presents him as a victim and asks Louisa to offer herself to help him.
And she hesitates. Feels unworthy. Afraid of more attacks.
Very human reactions. But Mary encourages her. Jesus calls her to be a victim of reparation for offenses against God, for the conversion of sinners.
And she accepts.
She does. With the promise she'll never be alone. Jesus will suffer within her, sharing his pains. With Mary as her help. A huge step in mystical union through shared suffering.
Then the vision of the crown of thorns. Lamenting pride.
Yes, and page 32, he asks her to accept it.
Hmm.
She does, experiencing intense pain, physical and spiritual, though no visible marks.
Which even affected her physically, like not being able to eat.
Remarkable, yes.
Right.
Real physical impacts causing misunderstandings with her family.
Then another vision, Jesus insulted, trampled.
Igniting an even stronger desire in her to share his pain. But Jesus explains, page 35, those offenses are small compared to humanity's ongoing ingratitude, rejecting his graces for earthly things.
So the call is to rise above earthly concerns. Focus on God's honor, salvation of souls.
Exactly. Don't be affected by insults. Remember that imitating Christ means suffering. That's a key takeaway.
The later part of Volume 1 seems to focus on increased suffering, but also this dependence on obedience.
Very much so. More opposition from her family restricting church, solitude. She laments this to Jesus.
And he comforts her by reminding her of his own suffering from people.
Yes, people rejecting his actions, his teachings. Identifying her trials with his own sufferings becomes a constant theme, a source of strength.
She endures years of suffering from people, demons, even directly from God, leading to public shame.
Yes, she pleads to suffer hiddenly, but Jesus emphasizes the value of offering public pain for public sins, like he did.
This leads to her becoming bedridden, frequent loss of consciousness.
It does, and the confessor's role becomes crucial here, helping her come out of these states through obedience, the sign of the cross. She attributes it to his sanctity.
But she was initially hesitant to talk about seeing Jesus during these states, fear of pride.
That struggle for humility continued, yes. Even amidst these extraordinary things, we see her resignation during a long period of suffering, a heavy cross.
She even faced difficulties from priests, contradictions.
Years of it. Harsh trials, reproaches instead of comfort. Torment when she couldn't obey conflicting commands. It wasn't an easy path.
Then there's the cholera threat resolving after her suffering.
A powerful sign of the effectiveness of her offering, yes.
Changing confessors was painful too.
Another difficult transition. But Jesus comforts her, tells her to focus only on him. He is master of hearts.
And she becomes more open with the new confessor.
Yes, driven by Jesus' commands and fear of losing him. The new confessor really pushes her to manifest everything to ensure it wasn't illusion. Different approach than the previous one, who focused more on resignation.
Then Jesus reveals the scale of divine justice is overflowing. Warning of scourges, war.
A heavy revelation. Lamenting how bodies meant as sanctuaries become sewers of rot, forcing him away.
That caused her intense pain, wanting to suffer the chastisements herself.
Deeply. She pleads with Jesus to hold back, invoking his blood, offering her heart as refuge, showing her compassion, her intercessory role.
And Jesus asks for continuous suffering for a time, for purification, leading to a mystical marriage.
Yes, for the good of creatures and her own purification, culminating in this mystical marriage and transformation. She hesitates again, needing obedience.
So she asks the confessor.
Yes, and unexpectedly gets obedience to remain in continuous suffering for about 40 days, which turned into 12 years.
12 years. And initially sad about not receiving the Eucharist.
Yes, but Jesus comforts her, sustains her spiritually.
Okay, this leads to that fascinating section on the 2 ways her soul leaves her body.
Right, intellectual speaking, and actually seeing and hearing Jesus.
Intellectual speaking, like direct understanding, no words.
Exactly. A light from Jesus into her intellect, sublime, rapid, profound insights, very hard to express in earthly language, she says.
And the second way is more like conversation.
Yes, seeing and hearing Jesus speak directly, like intimate spouses. His words are brief but carry immense light, more suited to human nature, easier to explain.
She uses that analogy of the teacher adapting.
Yeah, like a brilliant teacher simplifying things for beginners learning the alphabet.
Yeah.
Jesus adapting to her human capacity.
And she mentions two other ways briefly.
Very briefly, communicating the substance of his words, creating the reality in her soul like experiencing divine beauty directly, and also speaking interiorly while she's in her natural state, even when distracted.
Amazing. Okay, the volume then moves towards the mystical marriage itself.
Yes, the initial graces and unfolding of it. Her being bedridden becomes the means for Jesus to converse more freely, continuously, freeing her for this continuous holocaust of love.
Like the king drawing his queen away.
That's the analogy used. And it's divinely willed. The Lord shows displeasure if anyone tries to move her from this state.
There's that incident where she had to get up due to obedience.
Right, a conflict resolved by Jesus himself. Giving her that present on New Year's Day, milk, a kiss, the ring symbolizing their future espousal. Very intimate.
And the sign confirming she should stay in bed was peace in a war.
Yes, the war between Italy and Africa reconciling peacefully, underscoring the divine plan behind her situation.
After that, frequent, intimate visits from Jesus.
Constant visits, like a sweetheart who can't be apart. Comfort, affection, even spiritual nourishment.
He wants to draw her soul to him, to accompany him everywhere.
For greater intimacy, greater joy, yes. And she has that vision of him as a beautiful young man, radiating peace, highlighting how inner calm is needed to perceive divine beauty.
This leads to the spiritual transports, union in heaven.
A further deepening. Jesus sends a breath, draws her soul out of her body for the first time, a shared flight through the heavens.
Beautiful, but also involves sharing burdens, encounters with sin.
Yes, intimate gestures, but also shared pain when encountering iniquity. Her compassion for him, his reliance on her.
She even receives the bitter poison of sin sometimes, causing pain.
Intense pain. But it's contrasted with consoling visions, holy priests celebrating Mass, Jesus as the celebrant sometimes, giving her insights into the Mass, the Eucharist, the resurrection.
And then the actual mystical marriage ceremony.
Yeah.
In paradise.
Extraordinary event. Attended by the Trinity, the whole celestial court. Exchange of a blessed ring. She receives new rules for perfect living, though not detailed here.
And frequent transports to paradise follow.
Yes, witnessing the canticles of the blessed, understanding God's attributes, the joy of the saints, Jesus presents her as a triumph of my love.
Being shown her place in heaven must have been bittersweet.
Definitely. Intense longing upon returning to earth. The stark contrast between heavenly joy and earthly insipidity. The pain of separation becomes a continuous suffering, moderated only by obedience.
And those playful moments, Jesus inviting her to heaven, then redirecting her.
Almost like little tests or reminders of her earthly mission, praying, offering suffering for sinners, her active role in redemption.
The volume ends with more experiences of divine love, but also crucifixion.
Yes. Continuous coming and going of Jesus, infusing her with faith, contemplation of God's attributes and her own nothingness.
An immense desire for grace, like a mantle.
Yes. And the mystical marriage is renewed with the Trinity.
Followed by intense yearnings to be crucified with Jesus.
Deep, persistent longing, culminating in that vision of Jesus crucified, wanting to crucify her with him. Rays of light, nails. She feels fear despite her longing.
And she prays for this suffering to be hidden.
She does. Then comes the experience, pierced by light, nails in hands and feet, heart pierced by a lance. Great pain, great contentment. But no external marks.
And obedience lessens the pain.
Yes. This marks the first transmutation of his wounds onto her. The first of many crucifixions. She constantly asks for sorrow for sin and the grace of crucifixion.
And finally, that experience of confession with Jesus himself.
A profound conclusion to the volume. Jesus offers to be her confessor, to show her the sorrow her sins caused his heart, to instill that resolve to die rather than offend him.
She enters her nothingness, recites the Confiteor.
With deep confusion, humiliation. Learns pride was her greatest sin, puts her ear to his heart to comprehend the torment it causes him.
Confesses everything, thoughts, words, works, causes, omissions.
With intense sorrow, clarity on sin's gravity, God's immense love, Jesus applies his own pain to her soul as satisfaction, preparing her for absolution.
She pleads for forgiveness, acknowledging her senses offended him.
And receives that extraordinary grace not to fall again into voluntary venial sin after kissing his wounds. A major turning point.
And the volume ends with meditations on Jesus' early life, the Christmas novena.
Beautifully transitions there, yes. Meditations on his conception, life in the womb, his love, his suffering from the very first instant. Incredibly intimate insights.
So, wrapping up this deep dive into Volume 1, some clear themes emerge, don't they?
Absolutely. The profound intimacy with Jesus, the foundational need for humility and mortifying the will, the power of meditating on the
The
passion,
trials of desolation and spiritual warfare.
and those initial powerful graces of mystical union and her call to victimhood, it really lays the groundwork.
It's an incredible glimpse into the start of a unique spiritual journey.
Truly remarkable.
So, a final thought for you listening. Reflect on the immense personal love of God shown in Louisa's experiences. How might that understanding deepen your own spiritual life, your relationship with Christ?
And what aspects resonate most? The call to humility, the value of suffering offered out of love. Things to ponder.
And finally, if this exploration of Volume 1 has sparked your interest, please do let us know. We'd be happy to explore subsequent volumes of The Divine Will in future deep dives.
We would indeed. Thank you so much for joining us for this really enriching exploration.